Alright. So I decided to keep going with this reading Middlegames stuff from John Nunn's book. And I picked a position involving hanging pawns for a reason that will remain mysterious. And let's get down to it. So I just played queen takes d6. And the computer played knight b3. And we are following a game that was played between Mamedov and Andreykin in a Spice Cup playoff in 2009, the year that I learned chess. Okay, so knight b3. And the gist of the imbalance here is that white has hanging pawns, which are the D and C pawns here. We say that they are hanging because they can't really gain any support because there are no pawns on the E file or the B file to give them that support. They're missing. And the other imbalance is that black is a bishop against a knight. But in the book, they basically said that, excuse me, the major feature is this pawn structure. And the recipe for beating this pawn structure, as far as I know, is to keep it under constant pressure and try to force them to advance one of the pawns, resulting in a position where you can blockade them. For example, if we could make them play c5, we would blockade on d5, and if we could make them play d5, we would blockade on c5. And just prevent those pawns from advancing and get rid of all the stuff. Now here, I think this is not a very favorable hanging pawn structure because of the fact that 3 of the minor pieces have left the board for each side. If there were more minor pieces, white could probably use the support points that are created by these pawns, like they could put a knight on b5 or e5. They could maybe support the advance of these pawns using the bishops, but they're all gone. So the only question is, how am I going to maximize the pressure on these pawns? The most intuitive move is to just put this rook on an open file. Alright, so the master level computer played queen e3. It almost seems like I can win a pawn right away, but I'm kind of suspicious. No, I can't. I was thinking like rook takes c4, and queen d5, threatening checkmate and queen c4. But they could play queen f3. And if I play queen takes c4, they play queen takes b7. So I would not win anything. That would just be bad. I have to admit, I've rarely played against this pawn structure in practice, just because I usually play openings in which this doesn't arise, but it's still good to be prepared. And also interesting to just learn how to play against a given pawn structure. I usually play very flexible openings as it is, so I might be able to make it happen sometime. Maybe it's something like queen b4, trying to play rook takes c4. Maybe that's good. But that also feels like I'm decentralizing my queen. I'd rather keep it centralized if I can. Just pawn hunting might not be right, unless it wins. And in this case, that makes me think also of the move bishop a6, which pressures the c-pawn, but it also might allow them to liquidate with c5. And it also lets the pressure off of g2. The reason that they can't play c5 right away is that I can just play queen to d5 immediately. And they can't take on b6 because of queen g2 mate. So maybe I could also play queen c6 to try to provoke them into weakening their king. Maybe I could also play a5 to play a4 to take on d4. I haven't actually read the the chapter here. I like to play the positions first before I read. Okay, so after queen c6, this is forcing, so we can calculate it. If they play g3 or something, we just give a checkmate. If they play queen f3, we win a pawn. If they play queen g3 or queen h3, things are different. If they play queen g3, maybe we just win this c4 pawn. Like queen c6, queen g3, bishop a6. I'm attacking this 3 times, right? There'd be a queen on c6, a rook on c8, and a bishop on a6 attacking this pawn. I think I would just win it because the queen's not guarding d4 anymore. So let's try queen c6. And f3 just weakens their king, so that seems pretty good. Now here I'm just wondering what would happen after d5. Either I take it and allow the liquidation of the pawns completely. I mean, I'll win a pawn, but the pawns also all go away. And I get one more. Or I could play queen d6 and try to just win the c-pawn. I think if I play queen d6, they'll just take on e6. So this seems reasonable. C takes d5, the rook hits the queen. So I have to play queen d5. And if they take on c8, I'm just going to take with the rook. Okay, so I feel like I just won a pawn. I don't think in the game that black just won a pawn, but could have happened. All right, now they're threatening mate. Just because you're better doesn't mean they can't threaten mate. Queen e8, rook e8, rook e8 is checkmate, so probably I could defend the square with bishop b5. But that might allow knight d4 with gain of time, because knight d4 will be threatening knight takes b5. Actually not threatening it that much. But I don't see why I should give up my bishop. So maybe it's better to play h6 or g6. What could it be? Well, it's definitely not f6. Weakening the king doesn't make a lot of sense. g6 would allow queen h6, so they'd have some long-term issues. But h6, if I play king h7, they'll always be able to attack me on the light squares. But I'm also stronger on the light squares, so maybe h6 is better. I'm just going to scan for a superior option. Maybe I should figure out my plan first. I have a queenside majority now, 2 versus 1, so I probably just want to mobilize that. So moving a bishop seems natural, but it also fails tactically. I don't see any way that I could move this bishop. I think my rook is probably going to have to stay flexible to assist the pawns in the advance. I think making a space makes a lot of sense. I'm not missing any tactics. Alright, actually there's one tactic that I need to look out for. h6, they could play queen e7. But I think bishop b7 will solve all the issues, so h6. They're offering a queen trade. Could that really be good? I feel like if I just trade queens, then everything is great about this position. Queen takes, knight takes, and then like bishop c4 seems very good. I expect rook c1. But I'm going to play rook c5. I think that should be good. And now it's time to activate the king, I think. Am I missing any tactics? I think the answer is no. If I play king e7, they can try to force trade the minor pieces, but I think that just leads to a winning rook endgame. But there's no reason to allow knight f5, so I'm going to play g6 first. Alright, knight b3. So if I take, actually if I take, they'll play rook c5 first. Pawn c5, pawn b3. I should be able to get a classic breakthrough with like c4 and a4 at some point. 1, 2, 3. Hold on, takes. 1, 2. Yeah, I'm good. I was just trying to see if their king like magically gets in my face first. But the answer is no. My plan is to bring my king to b4. So let's see if I can make it happen in real life. Alright, king d3. Flexible. I think I'm going to just try to run them out of moves, so that I can eventually bully my way in. I think I could also play a5 to prevent b4, but there's no reason to waste these moves. I basically have two reserve moves with a6 and a5, with which to force them to do what I want. I think my position is improved enough. Maybe I'll throw in g5 just for good measure. So now if they want to win this pawn chain, they have to run all the way to h6. Alright, and if I play a5, king c3, a6, king c3, a5, king d3, c4 takes, king c5, king c3, a4, king b2, king takes c4. Alright, I think this is winning. They have to take it. King c3 is forced. g4. It's an interesting decision. I think I can play a3, king b3, a2, king a2, king c4, king b2, king d3, and that's winning. Excuse me. Well, this was overall a pretty smooth win from the hanging pawn formation. Usually when I pick a position from a book and try to win it, it doesn't go very well, because it turns out that the first side variation that the author failed to mention is like the critical test and a draw. But it looks like in this diagram, black actually is winning. I think so anyway. Alright, let's see how they like three connected pass pawns. There will never be stalemate. Did I just make a bishop? How did I manage that? Alright, so I miscollect. This is not me showboating. This is just straight blundering a promotion. All right, that was a pretty smooth win. Let's see what John Nunn had to say about this position. All right, so here's the book. I had it in this little window so you guys could read it if you wanted to, or if you could. It is pretty small. Actually, maybe I should make it bigger. It's kind of covering me up here. Boop. Okay, so now you can read part of the book. And I will read some of it too. Okay, so here it says the definition first for hanging pawns is that if a player has pawns on the C and D files, but no B or E pawns, and the opponent has no C or D pawns, then these pawns are called hanging pawns. The reason that it's important to include the fact that there are no opposing C or D pawns is that in a position like this, the one where I started out here, this was the start position where I played queen takes d6. In this position, if there were a C pawn or a D pawn, these weak pawns would be sheltered from attack by rooks and queens from the front. So they're not really hanging if they can't be attacked. Like, a weakness is only a weakness if you can pressure the weakness. So that's why that's part of the definition. So John Nunn says they are subject to attack down the half-open files, but unlike isolated pawns, there are no weak squares immediately in front of the pawns. So blockading them is not easy. Hanging pawns represent a slight weakness, but often confer a space advantage and chances to play for the initiative. Usually an isolated pawn has an outpost square in front, so you can blockade it very simply. The strategy for playing against hanging pawns usually involves forcing them to advance one of them. So he picked this example, Mamedov versus Andreikin, and he talks a little bit about the opening, and he said that it was a critical error to trade this light square bishop. So by playing c4 here, and not playing like queen b3 or something, they're forcing black to fork the bishop and the queen. And in this pawn structure, giving up the light square bishop is bad. So that's how this all happened. And then black proceeded to develop the pieces and attack the central pawns. They traded the d for e pawn in order to get the pure isolated, hanging pawn structure. And here he says, now white has hanging pawns, but this is a very unfavorable case. With only one pair of minor pieces on the board, white has none of the attacking chances which often compensate for the weakness of such pawns. Moreover, black's pieces are well placed to exert pressure against the pawns. That's an important point. If the pawns are not under pressure, white has a free hand to play for the initiative. So here, let me see if I can scroll this into view. All right, yeah, you guys can see it now. Mostly anyway. So, where were we? Right, so he gives a interrobang mark to the move knight b3. You guys can see that in the middle on the right. He said that rook fd1 and the plan of knight f1 to e3 was superior, but black is still better. Probably the fact that black is better in general is the only reason that I was able to beat the computer in this position. All right, so they played rook fd8. I'll play the moves on the board. In the game, rook fd8 occurred. Queen e3 also occurred. I'm surprised that if knight b3 is not that good that the computer played it. This is the moment where rook fd1 was suggested. Oh man, I deleted all the commentary. And it's okay. All right, so knight b3 is what they did. Ah, screw it. I'm gonna take this to chess base. Give me 1 second to do the good thing. Okay, give me 1 second to adjust myself. Adjust, adjust, adjust. Maybe I should just close this. All right, that worked perfectly. Okay, so this is the game. And I'll flip the board because we were playing black here. All right, and it's updating. Fantastic. So, queen e3, bishop a6. Bishop a6 is what they did in the game. What I actually did was queen c6, provoking f3, and then bishop a6, and I just won the pawn. But it looks like Andraken thought bishop a6 right away was fine. But the reason I didn't want to play bishop a6 was because of the c5 move. Even though they get an isolated pawn, it's not as clear as it would have been before. They do get some counterplay. All right, let's see. What did John Nunn say about this? Anything? All right, let me scroll down. Yeah, he said that queen c6 was a miss. And he said that c5 is the only way to avoid the immediate loss of a pawn. But when one of the hanging pawns has to advance voluntarily, then the remaining pawn becomes backward and the square in front of it is very weak. So this d5 square becomes very weak after queen d5. It's interesting that he doesn't take right away, because after pawn takes c5, I think they could play either knight c5 or dc5. I think dc5 is probably better because it forces them to blockade in a less spacious area, and it keeps this knight protecting it nicely. Maybe here white could play a little bit actively, trade like one pair of rooks to be able to play rook d6 one day, something like that. But queen d5 was their choice, probably a much better move. Rook f e1, bishop c4. Bishop c4 seems awkward. But is there really an alternative? Excuse me. Probably rook d1. One of these rooks to d1 would be a better choice. Oh, there's actually a tactic here. John Nunn suggested h3, and after queen takes, pawn takes, queen takes d4. It's a mistake. Due to rook takes d4, rook takes d4, deflecting the rook from the back rank, and then pawn takes b6. This is threatening back rank mate, as well as the capture of yet another pawn and promotion. So this is deadly. For example, they can take and play rook d8 to avoid getting checkmated, but then after b7, it's really not much better. King f8, rook c8, king e7, you get a queen. Not very good. There's also rook d8 and then a queen just to avoid counterplay. So that being said, it would have been much better to play a move like h3. Although it does feel that black has the pressure. All right, now they played rook d1. But this actually does lose a pawn because of back rank mate threat. All right, if they play, let's see, pawn takes d, pawn takes c5 here. This is queen takes d1 and back rank mate. So that's not good. And if they play knight takes c5, then rook takes c5 is much the same. So that's why rook d1's not good, and they should have played something like h3 to guard against back rank mate. All right, so black just cleanly won the pawn. Good for them. And the rest of the game is kind of a wash. He doesn't really give a lot of variations here. This is interesting technique. They played e5 in order to capture on d4 in a more favorable way, so the pawn's not isolated. So still hinging on that back rank threat. So they played queen a5, pawn takes d4, queen takes a7, and queen takes b3. This position's clearly winning. Like, pretty much anybody should be able to beat Fritz in a position like this. It's just too good. All right, so this was the end of the game. And they resigned here, because if they play king h2, there's queen takes d1, and if they take, then another queen appears on e1.